A candymaker's daughter offered a sample, not knowing a lonely count would rewrite her life. The rain that fell on the village of Oakhaven was a miserable, persistent drizzle, turning the cobblestones to slick, dark mirrors and the sky to a sheet of bruised pewter. For Alara, the candymaker's daughter, it was the perfect reflection of the state of her accounts. She stood behind the small, worn counter of her shop, the air thick with the ghosts of sugar and spice from a morning of fruitless boiling. Not a single soul had braved the downpour for a honey drop or a twist of licorice. The bell above the door remained stubbornly, achingly silent. Her apron, dusted with a fine film of flour and sugar, felt less like the uniform of her craft and more like a shroud for her hopes. Her father had left her the shop, his recipes, and his debts. The recipes were a treasure, the debts a millstone. Each unsold caramel, each forgotten peppermint stick, was another ounce of weight pulling her down. She traced the rim of a large copper pot, its surface cool and dim. It was in this very pot that her father had taught her the magic of turning simple sugar into moments of joy. Now it felt like a cauldron of her anxieties. From his vantage point in the highest tower of Blackwood Manor, the rain was a veil separating him from the world. Count Alistair Beaumont watched the water streak down the leaded glass, blurring the distant, huddled shapes of the village into an impressionist smear. The world outside was wet and alive. Inside, his world was dry, silent, and suffocatingly grand. Dust motes danced in the slivers of gray light, the only lively things in a room dominated by dark wood, faded tapestries, and the crushing weight of legacy. A scar, a pale, jagged line, cut from his left temple to the corner of his jaw. A souvenir from a war that had stolen his youth and a riding accident that had stolen the woman he was to marry. Since then, he had become the beast of Blackwood, a recluse haunting his own halls. His aunt's latest letter lay on the mahogany desk, its elegant script a series of polite, yet unyielding demands. You must secure the line, Alistair. A ball. You must invite the eligible daughters of the county. Find a wife. It is your duty. Duty. The word was a cage. He saw the women in his mind's eye, simpering, calculating, their eyes assessing the value of his title, the size of his estate, flinching almost imperceptibly from the scar on his face. They would see the count, not the man. They would want the fortune, not the hollowed-out heart that came with it. A bitter, desperate idea, born of cynicism and a flicker of remaining hope, began to form. What if he could find someone who knew nothing of the count? What if he could walk among them as a simple man? A test. A foolish, theatrical, and perhaps cruel test to find one person whose kindness was not a commodity. He donned the plainest clothes he owned, worn woolen trousers, a simple linen shirt, and a rough-spun coat that had belonged to a groundskeeper. Without the silks and signet ring, with his hair unkempt and the scar seeming more like a brawler's mark than a nobleman's wound, he was someone else. He was no one. The transformation felt both liberating and terrifying. He walked out of the oppressive grandeur of the manor and into the cleansing rain, his boots sinking into the mud of the path leading to Oakhaven. The village, when he entered it, was quiet and hunkered down. He passed the smithy, the scent of hot metal and coal hanging in the damp air. He passed the baker's, a waft of yeast a brief comfort. Then he saw it, a small, unassuming shop with faded lettering that read, Everett Sweetmeats through the window. He saw a lone figure, a young woman with hair the color of dark honey, her shoulders slumped in weary contemplation. He felt a pang of something unfamiliar, a shared melancholy. On impulse, he pushed the door open. A small bell chimed, a sound so startlingly bright it made them both jump. Alara looked up, her heart giving a hopeful leap that immediately faltered. The man standing in her doorway was not one of the wealthy matrons who might place a large order. He was drenched, his coat dark with rain, his face shadowed by weariness. He looked as beaten down by the day as she felt. There was a severity to his face, a harsh line to his jaw, and a stark, pale scar that spoke of some past violence. He looked like a man who had forgotten the taste of sweetness. He said nothing, merely looked around the small, tidy shop, his gaze lingering on the glass jars of colored candies. She saw not a customer, but a fellow soul seeking refuge from the storm. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Kindness costs nothing, Alara, and it is the sweetest thing we can offer. Straightening her apron and her spine, she offered a small, sincere smile. Welcome. It's a dreadful day out. She reached for a small jar on the counter, using a pair of silver tongs to pick up a single, glistening piece of amber-wrapped candy. Please, she said, her voice soft but clear. Have one of our honesty caramels. It's my father's recipe. A little warmth for a cold day. She held it out to him. Alistair stared at the offering. It was a simple, absurdly small gesture. He, who could command banquets, was being offered a single piece of candy by a shopgirl who likely couldn't afford to give her wares away. He had come seeking a test of character, and in the first minute, in the first interaction, he had been met with an act of unprompted generosity. He looked from the candy to her eyes. They were a clear, steady brown, and held no artifice, only a quiet dignity. He had expected to be the observer in this charade, the one in control. He suddenly felt like the one being seen. Slowly, he reached out a hand that was calloused from riding, but had not known a day of real labor, and took the caramel from the tongs. He was Alistair Beaumont, the Count of Blackwood, and his life, though he did not know it, had just been irrevocably altered. A candymaker's daughter offered a sample, not knowing a lonely count would rewrite her life. He returned the next day, the rain having given way to a fragile, watery sunlight. This time he was prepared. He was no longer just a wanderer, he had a role to play. He introduced himself as Mr. Ashworth, a steward recently employed at the manor, tasked with a matter of great importance. The Count of Blackwood intends to host a grand ball in the coming month, he announced, his voice a low, formal rumble that seemed too large for the little shop. He watched Alara for her reaction. Her eyes widened slightly, not with social climbing glee, but with the practical calculation of a merchant. A ball at the manor meant the gentry would be spending. A ball? She repeated, a flicker of professional interest lighting her features. That will be the talk of the county. Indeed, he said, allowing himself a small, tight smile. The Count is particular. He wishes for every detail to be perfect. He has charged me with sourcing all provisions locally, from the finest artisans Oakhaven has to offer. He paused, letting the weight of his fabricated purpose settle between them. Your shop was recommended for its confectionery. This was a lie, of course. No one had recommended it. He had chosen it. Alara's heart began to beat a little faster. A commission from the manor, even a small one, could clear her father's most pressing debts, could mean survival. But she held her excitement in check, her professional demeanor a shield. I am honored to be considered, Mr. Ashworth. I uphold my father's standards of quality. Everything is made by hand, with the finest ingredients available. So I have been told. He lied again, the words feeling like ash in his mouth. To make his ruse plausible, he needed to engage her, to test her wares and her character over time. The Count requires a thorough vetting process. I will need to sample a variety of your offerings over the next few weeks to present a recommendation. It was a perfect excuse for proximity. It was also a monstrous manipulation. He felt a twinge of self-loathing, but pushed it down. This was necessary. Alara nodded, her mind already racing through recipes and ingredient costs. Of course, that is perfectly reasonable. What sort of sweets does the Count prefer? Does he favor fruit jellies, spiced nuts, or perhaps chocolates? Alistair froze. He had no idea what he preferred. He hadn't taken pleasure in food for years. He has broad tastes, he improvised, sounding more like a bumbling secretary than a confident steward. We should start with the basics, the caramels you offered yesterday, and perhaps those. He pointed to a jar of pale, sugar-dusted mints. And so began their strange ritual. Every few days, Mr. Ashworth would appear at her door. He was a somber, serious presence, his questions about boiling temperatures and sugar purity starkly formal. He would sit at the small table in the corner of the shop, a notebook and pencil in hand, as she presented him with small plates of her creations. He tasted everything with a grave intensity, as if judging the fate of nations. He was, she decided, the most serious man she had ever met. He rarely smiled, and when he did, it was a fleeting, almost pained expression. Yet, she found herself looking forward to his visits. He was her only regular customer, and the steady income from the samples was a lifeline. More than that, there was a quiet integrity to him. He was respectful, his attention undivided. He listened, truly listened, when she explained the subtle art of tempering chocolate or the precise moment to pull a toffee from the heat. He was learning her craft, and in doing so, he was learning her. One afternoon, while inspecting a heavy copper kettle she was struggling to polish, his hand slipped. The edge of the pot, sharper than it looked, sliced a clean, deep line across his palm. "Oh!" Alara cried out, dropping her polishing cloth. "Heavens, that's a nasty cut." Alistair swore under his breath, more from the shock of the pain than the injury itself. Blood, dark and shockingly red, welled up instantly. He instinctively made a fist, as if to hide the wound, to hide the weakness. "It is nothing. It is not nothing," she insisted, her tone shifting from professional to one of gentle command. "Sit down. Right now." Before he could protest, she had bustled to the small living quarters behind the shop and returned with a basin of warm water, clean linen strips, and a small pot of herbal salve that smelled of calendula and yarrow. He found himself seated at the table, his hand resting, palm up, as she gently dabbed at the blood. Her touch was feather-light, yet competent. Her fingers were deft, her brow furrowed in concentration. He watched her, mesmerized. No one had touched him with such uncomplicated care in years. The women of his class offered fluttery, useless sympathy. Servants were efficient but distant. Alara was simply present. She was healing a small wound, but it felt as if she were tending to something much deeper. "You have to be careful with these old pots," she murmured, her focus entirely on her task. "They have stories, but they also have sharp edges." He looked at her bent head, the way a few strands of her honey-colored hair had escaped her bun. He saw the faint dusting of flour on her cheek. He was acutely aware of the warmth of her fingers against his skin, a warmth that seemed to travel up his arm and lodge itself in his chest. "Thank you," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. She looked up, her brown eyes meeting his. For a moment, the pretense of steward and candymaker fell away. They were just a man and a woman, a quiet intimacy blooming in the sugar-scented air. She could see past the gruff exterior to the flicker of vulnerability in his gaze. He wasn't just a stern steward. There was a profound sadness in him, a loneliness that resonated with her own. "It's the least I could do," she said softly, wrapping his hand in a clean white bandage. "A candy-maker must know a little about healing as well. Sugar can be a balm, but so can a simple kindness." He pulled his hand back slowly once she was done, the clean bandage a stark white against his skin. The sting of the cut was fading, replaced by a different, more complicated ache in his chest. He had come to test her, to judge her. But as he sat there, his hand throbbing with a warmth that had nothing to do with the injury, he felt as if he were the one under examination, and he was being found profoundly wanting. The first cracks in his cynical armor had appeared, not from a grand gesture, but from the simple, honest touch of a candymaker's daughter. The bandage on his hand became a tangible symbol of the shift between them. It was a week before it came off, and in that week, his visits as Mr. Ashworth took on a different quality. The formal tastings became lingering conversations. The notebook was often forgotten on the table as he asked her about her life, not as a steward gathering information, but as a man genuinely intrigued. "Your father taught you all of this?" he asked one afternoon, gesturing to the array of jars and the complex machinery of her small kitchen. "He did," Alara said, a fond, melancholic smile touching her lips. She was pouring a sheet of shimmering, near-translucent brittle onto a marble slab. "He used to say that sugar has a memory. If you are angry or sad when you cook it, it will be brittle and sharp. But if you are patient and happy, it will be giving and sweet. She looked at him, her gaze direct. He believed our emotions became part of the food. Alistair thought of the joyless, formal meals served in his silent dining hall. What emotions were baked into his bread? Despair? Loneliness? He watched her work, her movements economical and graceful, her hands knowing their task by heart. She spoke of her father with such love, of her craft with such passion, that he felt a pang of envy. His own father had taught him land management, political maneuvering, and the cold arithmetic of power. He had never spoken of joy. "You miss him," he stated, the words softer than he intended. "Every day," she admitted, her voice quiet. "But when I am here, doing this, it feels as if he is still with me. His legacy isn't an estate or a title. It's this," she tapped a cooling piece of brittle. "It's the ability to make something good and honest from simple things." Honest. The word struck him like a physical blow. Every moment he spent with her was predicated on a lie. He was not Mr. Ashworth, the humble steward. He was a fraud, a count playing a cruel game. The guilt, once a dull ache, was now a constant, sharp pain. He found himself wanting, more than anything, to be the man she thought he was. A simple man of quiet integrity, earning an honest living. He started to despise the fine clothes waiting for him back at the manor, the title that felt more like a burden than a privilege. One day, he arrived to find her not in the shop, but in the small garden behind it, tending a row of mint plants. She looked up and smiled, and the simple, unguarded gesture made his heart clench. "For the mint creams," she explained, holding up a fragrant leaf. "There is no flavor like the one you have grown yourself." He found himself kneeling in the dirt beside her, pulling weeds, his supposedly injured hand now strong enough for the task. They worked in a comfortable silence, the scent of mint and damp earth rising around them. He learned that she loved the color of the sky just before sunrise, that she feared thunderstorms, and that she dreamed of one day having enough money to open a small school to teach her craft to orphan children. Her dreams were not of marrying a lord or acquiring jewels. They were of creating, of sharing, of building something that would outlast her. He, in turn, shared a heavily edited version of his own story. He spoke of the war, but as a common soldier, not an officer. He spoke of loss, framing the death of his fiancée as a youthful heartbreak from which he was still recovering. He told just enough of the truth to feel genuine, but it was a truth wrapped in a thick, suffocating layer of deception. "You carry a great deal of sadness, Mr. Ashworth," she said one day, her perception so acute it startled him. They were sitting inside, the shop quiet, a plate of lemon drops between them. "I see it in your eyes sometimes. It is like a locked room you are afraid to let anyone enter." He had no answer for that. He could only look away, his jaw tight. He was the Count of Blackwood, a man of immense power and privilege. He could command armies, acquire land, host kings. But he could not, for the life of him, figure out how to tell this candymaker's daughter the truth. The connection between them was deepening, a fragile, beautiful thing growing in the poisoned soil of his lie. He knew it couldn't last. He knew the revelation would destroy it. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to stop it. Each day he spent with her was a day of stolen warmth, a brief respite from the cold prison of his life. He was falling for her, not as part of his test, but in spite of it. The test had become a trap, and he was the one who was caught. The annual village festival was a week away, a day of music, dancing, and community that marked the height of summer. It was the one day of the year when the rigid social strata seemed to relax, when farmer and merchant mingled freely in the town square. For Alara, it was usually a day of brisk business, selling bags of sweets to children and courting couples. This year, however, it presented a new and unexpected complication. Thomas, the village blacksmith, appeared at her door. He was a good man, strong and kind, with a shy smile and hands permanently stained with soot. He was respected, reliable, and had been looking at Alara with gentle admiration for months. He held a small, inexpertly tied posy of wildflowers. "Miss Alara," he began, his deep voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I was wondering, that is, if you are not too busy with the shop, if you might do me the honor of accompanying me to the festival?" Alara was touched. It was a sweet, honest invitation from a sweet, honest man. It was what a practical young woman in her position should want. A match with Thomas would be a sensible one, securing her place in the village and offering a future of stability. "Thomas, that is very kind of you," she started, a genuine warmth in her voice. It was at that precise moment that the bell above the door chimed, and Mr. Ashworth stepped inside. He stopped short, his gaze falling on the blacksmith, the flowers, and the gentle blush on Alara's cheeks. A storm cloud passed over his face, so dark and immediate it was frightening. His usual stoicism shattered, replaced by an expression of raw, unguarded possession. Alistair felt a surge of primitive jealousy so potent it stole his breath. The sight of this simple, worthy man offering Alara flowers, offering her a life that he, in his disguise, could never provide, was intolerable. All his carefully constructed composure as the mild-mannered steward evaporated. "I am here to finalize the selections for the ball," he said, his voice clipped and cold. He completely ignored Thomas, his eyes locked on Alara. The blacksmith, sensing the sudden, icy tension, shuffled his feet. I'll leave you to your business, then, Alara. Perhaps you can give me your answer later." He gave a short, awkward bow and retreated, the hopeful air he'd brought with him dissipating as the door closed behind him. Alara turned to Ashworth, her brow furrowed. "That was not very polite, Mr. Ashworth. Thomas is a good man." "He is a blacksmith," Alistair retorted, the aristocratic disdain he usually kept hidden leaking into his tone. He immediately regretted it. "Forgive me, that was uncalled for." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of profound agitation. The lie was becoming unbearable. He was losing control. He couldn't stand the thought of her with someone else, couldn't bear the idea of her accepting the blacksmith's simple, honest life while he was trapped in his gilded cage. "What is wrong?" she asked, her voice soft with concern, mistaking his jealousy for some other distress. "The festival," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "Will you be there?" "I always have a stall," she replied, confused by his intensity. "No, not to work," he insisted, stepping closer. Will you save a dance for me?" The question hung in the air between them. It was a shocking breach of his formal persona. Stewards did not ask to dance with the merchants they were commissioning. But he was not looking at her like a steward. He was looking at her with a desperate, hungry yearning that made her breath catch in her throat. This was the man she had glimpsed behind the sadness, a man of deep, hidden passions. The thought of dancing with Thomas seemed sensible and safe. The thought of dancing with Mr. Ashworth felt dangerous and thrilling, a step into the unknown. She hesitated, her heart pounding. His gaze was insistent, pleading. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Mr. Ashworth. I will save a dance for you." A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees washed over Alistair. He had acted on pure, selfish impulse, breaking the rules of his own deception, but he had secured a promise. He had, for a moment, staked a claim. He had no right to her, not as the Count, and certainly not as the fraudulent steward. But in that moment, as she agreed to meet him amidst the music and the laughter of the festival, he felt a spark of hope. The midpoint of his foolish test had been reached. He had come to observe her from a distance, but now he was inextricably tangled in her life. He was no longer a judge. He was a suitor, albeit a dishonest one. And he was beginning to realize that saving her from the blacksmith was less important than saving himself from the lonely prison he had built. The day of the festival dawned bright and clear, a perfect summer's day. The village square was transformed, festooned with ribbons and flowers. The air hummed with the cheerful cacophony of laughter, merchants hawking their wares, and the distant, merry tune of a fiddler. Alara, true to her word, had a small stall near the fountain, its shelves laden with colorful bags of sweets. She did a brisk trade, but her eyes kept scanning the crowd, searching for a tall, somber figure who did not belong. She danced with Thomas as was proper. He was a steady, if slightly clumsy, partner, his conversation earnest and kind. He spoke of his forge, of a new contract to shoe the horses for a neighboring baron, of his hopes for a good harvest. It was a conversation about a life she could easily imagine, a good, solid, predictable life. But her heart was not in it. Her heart was listening for a different footstep, waiting for a different pair of eyes. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of rose and violet, she saw him. Mr. Ashworth was standing near the edge of the square, half hidden in the shadow of the old oak tree. He was watching her. He had changed from his usual drab work clothes into a respectable, but still simple, dark coat and clean white shirt. He looked devastatingly handsome and utterly out of place. Their dance was a world away from her dance with the blacksmith. When Alistair took her hand, a jolt of electricity passed between them. He was a surprisingly graceful dancer, guiding her with a firm, confident touch that belied his humble persona. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The music of the fiddles and flutes swelled around them, creating a private world in the middle of the swirling crowd. He held her gaze, and in his eyes, she saw an ocean of unspoken emotion, longing, regret, and a startling tenderness that made her feel as if she were the only person in the world. The stern steward was gone, replaced by a man of profound feeling. When the music ended, he didn't release her hand. "Walk with me," he said, his voice a low command. He led her away from the lights and the noise of the festival, down a quiet path that ran alongside the river. The moon had risen, a perfect silver disk casting a shimmering path on the water. The only sounds were the gentle chirping of crickets and the soft murmur of the current. "Ilara," he began, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. He finally let go of her hand, turning to face her. "I have not been entirely forthright with you." Her heart skipped a beat. Was this it? Was he married? Was he leaving? "These past few weeks," he continued, struggling for words, "watching you, talking with you. You are the most honest, decent person I have ever known. You possess a strength and a kindness that I thought no longer existed in this world." He took a step closer, his face etched with turmoil in the moonlight. "You have shown me what it is to have passion for one's work, what it is to find joy in simple things. You have woken something in me." Before she could process his words, before she could ask what he meant, he closed the small distance between them. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch both hesitant and desperate, and then he kissed her. It was not a gentle, tentative kiss. It was a kiss of profound, desperate need, of weeks of suppressed emotion pouring forth. It was the kiss of a man starved for warmth, a man drowning who had just found air. Ilara's mind went blank, all thoughts of blacksmiths and debts and social propriety dissolving in the overwhelming flood of sensation. She responded instinctively, her hands coming up to grip his arms, kissing him back with an answering fervor she didn't know she possessed. Felt like a homecoming to a place she'd never been. When he finally broke the kiss, they were both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. The lie was a physical weight in his chest, a poison. He had to tell her. He had to burn this deception to the ground and see what, if anything, remained. "Ilara, he started, the words forming on his lips. "My name is not Ashworth. I am." He looked into her eyes, shining with a mixture of shock, wonder, and nascent love. He saw the trust she had placed in him, the simple, unvarnished man she believed him to be. And in that moment his courage failed him. The fear of seeing that beautiful expression curdle into disgust and betrayal was too much to bear. What if he told her and she turned away? He would lose this, the only real thing he had felt in years. He couldn't risk it. Not yet. "I am a man who does not deserve your kindness," he finished lamely, the coward's retreat. She looked at him, confused but still held by the magic of the moment. "You are a good man, Mr. Ashworth," she whispered, placing a gentle hand on his cheek, right beside the scar. "Don't ever think you are not." His heart broke. He had reached the highest point of their connection, a moment of pure, transcendent feeling. But it was built on a foundation of sand, and he knew, with a sickening certainty, that the tide was about to come in. The calm was over. The storm was coming. The next week was a dream. Alara floated through her days in a haze of happy anticipation. The commission for the Count's ball was finalized. Mr. Ashworth had given her a substantial advance, enough to settle her father's most pressing debts and order the finest chocolate and sugar from the city. She worked with a renewed passion, her heart singing. The kiss by the river had changed everything. The sadness in him had seemed to recede, replaced by a tender attentiveness. He still came to the shop, but the pretense of tasting was gone. He came to see her. They talked for hours, their conversations now filled with a shared intimacy, the air crackling with unspoken promises. He was still her Mr. Ashworth, a man of humble station but deep feeling, and she was falling deeply, irrevocably in love with him. The day of the final delivery arrived. It was the largest and most elaborate order of her life. Hundreds of gilded chocolate truffles, spun sugar cages holding candied violets, and boxes upon boxes of her signature honesty caramels. She had worked for 3 days straight, but her exhaustion was eclipsed by her pride. She packed everything with meticulous care into wooden crates, wanting to make the delivery herself. It was her triumph, the culmination of her father's legacy and her own hard work. She also hoped she might see Ashworth at the manor, to share a stolen glance of victory with him in his place of work. She hired a small cart and made the journey up the winding road to Blackwood Manor. As she approached, the sheer scale of the place was intimidating. It was less a house and more a fortress of gray stone, its towers clawing at the sky. It looked cold, forbidding, and utterly lifeless. It was hard to imagine her cheerful, vibrant sweets being served within its gloomy walls. She pulled up to the massive front entrance and, with the help of the carter, began to unload the crates. The huge oak doors swung open, and a severe-looking butler in black livery appeared. "I have the delivery of confectionery for the Count's ball," Alara announced, her voice sounding small in the cavernous entryway. "From Everett's Sweetmeats." "Ah yes, the candymaker. We were expecting you," the butler said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Bring them this way." He led her through a vast, echoing hall. Suits of armor stood like silent, empty sentinels along the walls. The air was cold and smelled of stone and beeswax. There were no fires in the enormous hearths. This was Ashworth's world? How could a man with so much warmth in him work in a place so devoid of it? "If I may," Alara said, her voice hesitant. "Could I have a brief word with Mr. Ashworth?" "The steward. He handled the arrangements." The butler stopped and turned, a look of utter confusion on his face. "Mr. Ashworth? I am afraid you are mistaken, miss. There is no one by that name employed at the manor." Alara's smile faltered. "No, you must be mistaken. A tall man with a scar on his face? He said he was the Count's new steward." The butler's expression cleared, replaced by a flicker of understanding so horrifying it made Alara's blood run cold. "Ah," he said slowly, "you must mean his lordship." At that exact moment, a figure appeared at the top of the grand, sweeping staircase. He was not dressed in the simple, rough clothes of a steward. He was attired in a coat of exquisite black velvet, a snowy white cravat at his throat, his boots polished to a mirror shine. His hair was perfectly styled, and the scar on his face, which had seemed like a mark of a hard life, now looked like a dramatic, aristocratic wound. He descended the stairs with an authority and grace she had never seen. It was the man she knew as Ashworth, but it was not him at all. This was a stranger, powerful, formidable nobleman. Their eyes met across the vast, cold expanse of the hall. She saw panic in his gaze, a desperate plea. He saw the dawning horror in hers. The world tilted on its axis. The air rushed from her lungs. The butler, oblivious to the shattering drama, bowed his head. "My lady," he said, his voice echoing in the sudden, terrible silence. "You mean his lordship, the Count of Blackwood." "Count of Blackwood." The words slammed into her, each one a physical blow. The man she had confided in, the man she had tended to, the man she had kissed by the river, the man she was falling in love with was a lie. He was not Mr. Ashworth. He was the reclusive, monstrous beast of Blackwood. And she had been his game, his test, a diversion. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, the denial a fragile thing against the crushing reality. "Alara, let me explain," Alistair said, his voice tight with desperation as he reached the bottom of the stairs. But she backed away from him, her hand flying to her mouth. The warmth she had seen in him was a lie. The connection was a lie. His admiration, his interest, all of it was a performance. She was a peasant girl he had decided to test, like one might test a horse before purchase. The humiliation was a fire in her veins, scalding away the tenderness, leaving only rage and a profound, bottomless heartbreak. "Explain?" she choked out, her voice trembling with fury. "Explain what? The wager you made with your friends? The little test to see if the simple village girl was honest enough? Was I a disappointment, my lord?" She spat the title like a curse. "Or did I perform to your satisfaction?" "It was not like that," he insisted, taking a step toward her. "I just wanted to find someone real." "Real?" she cried, a harsh, broken laugh escaping her lips. "And you sought it through deception? You stood in my shop, in my home, and you lied to my face every single day. You let me pour out my heart to you. You let me care for you." Her voice broke on the last words. "And all of it was a lie." She turned to the crates of her beautiful, hopeful candies. They looked grotesque now, monuments to her foolishness. With a surge of adrenaline, she fumbled in her apron for the purse containing the advance he had given her. She pulled it out and threw it at his feet. The coins scattered across the marble floor with a series of sharp, accusatory clicks. "I want none of your money," she said, her voice now dangerously quiet, honed to a razor's edge of pain and pride. "My father's recipes are not for sale to men who trade in lies. My honesty is not a commodity for you to test." She turned on her heel, not giving him a chance to say another word. She walked, straight-backed and blind with tears, out of the cold, cavernous hall, away from the man who was both her greatest joy and her deepest wound. She walked out of the monstrous castle and did not look back, leaving the Count of Blackwood standing alone amidst the ruins of his deception and the scattered, glittering price of his betrayal. The world lost its color, the vibrant hues of her candies, the deep ruby of raspberry jellies, the sunny yellow of lemon drops, all seemed muted, gray. Alara moved through the days that followed in a fog of numb, mechanical motion. She opened the shop. She boiled sugar. She swept the floor. But the joy was gone. The heart of her craft had been ripped out, and all that remained was the hollow, repetitive labor. The scent of melting chocolate, once a comfort, now made her nauseous. It smelled of lies. She refused his messages. They came daily at first, delivered by a footman in the Blackwood livery who stood awkwardly at her door. First, there were letters, thick vellum missives she burned unopened in her hearth. Then came gifts, a bolt of fine silk, a basket of exotic fruits, all of which she sent back immediately with a cold, polite refusal. She would not be bought. Her pride was the only thing she had left, and she clung to it like a shield. Thomas, the blacksmith, came by again, his kind face full of concern. He did not press her or ask questions. He simply left a small, perfectly wrought iron hook by her door, to hang a pot, as his note said. It was a simple, honest gesture from a simple, honest man, and it made her cry for the first time since she had fled the castle. She cried for the life she could have had, the simple peace she had almost considered, before her heart had been stolen by a phantom. She was a candymaker who could no longer taste sweetness, A woman whose heart had been broken by a man who didn't even exist. Mr. Ashworth was a ghost, and the Count of Blackwood was a monster. There was no one left to love, and no one left to hate but herself, for being so foolish. She asserted her agency in the only way she knew how. She worked. She would survive this. She would not be a tragic footnote in a nobleman's board history. She was Alara, the candymaker's daughter, and her own worth was not determined by a count's cruel game. In his opulent prison, Alistair was living in his own private hell. The silence of the manor, once a refuge, was now accusatory. Every empty room, every cold hearth, echoed with her absence. He would walk the halls and see her ghost everywhere, in the glint of a polished suit of armor that reminded him of her copper pots, in the scent of beeswax that failed to cover the memory of her calendula salve. The ball was a disaster. He moved through it like a ghost himself, his face a mask of cold civility. The sweets she had made, which he had insisted on serving, were a torment. He watched the powdered, perfumed ladies of the gentry devour her honesty caramels without a thought, and the irony was so bitter he could barely breathe. He was forced to confront the totality of his folly. He had set out to find honesty through lies, and in the process, he had become the very thing he despised. A manipulative aristocrat using his power to play with a person's life. His aunt, seeing his despair, finally confronted him. "You have done a terrible, cruel thing, Alistair," she said, her usual social sharpness replaced by a rare gravity. "But the question is, why?" "I was afraid," he admitted, the confession costing him dearly. He stood before the portrait of his late fiancée, her painted smile serene and distant. "I was afraid of being wanted for my title, afraid of being measured and assessed, afraid of being alone." He turned from the portrait to face his aunt. "I hid behind my grief for years. It was a shield. I thought I was testing for a replacement for Catherine, but that wasn't it. Alara, she is nothing like Catherine. She is fire and earth and hard work. She didn't soothe my grief. She burned it away. She made me feel alive. And I destroyed it." He finally understood. His test was not for her. It was for him. He was the one who needed to prove he could connect to another person authentically. And he had failed spectacularly. The isolation he had cultivated for years was now absolute. He had found the one person in the world who could lead him out of the darkness, and he had slammed the door in her face. The despair was a physical weight, pressing him down, but beneath it, a new, terrifying resolve began to form. Apologies were not enough. Gifts were an insult. He had to do more. He had to prove he was not the man who had lied to her, but the man she had made him want to be. He had to earn her, not with his title or his wealth, but with the truth. Market day in Oakhaven was a vibrant, chaotic affair. The square bustled with farmers selling their produce, weavers displaying their cloths, and villagers exchanging gossip. Alara was at her stall, her face pale but composed, as she measured out bags of peppermint sticks. Suddenly, a ripple of silence spread through the crowd. The chatter died down, heads turned, and a path began to form. Through the parting sea of villagers rode the Count of Blackwood. He was not in his fine carriage, surrounded by outriders. He was alone on his warhorse, but he was dressed not in velvets, but in the simple, dark coat of Mr. Ashworth. He dismounted in the center of the square, the horse's reins loose in his hand, and his eyes, stripped of all aristocratic hauteur, found Alara. He did not approach her stall. He stood there, in the middle of the square, a powerful man making himself utterly vulnerable before the entire village. He was forcing a public reckoning. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to run, to hide, but she was rooted to the spot, trapped by the collective gaze of her neighbors and the raw, desperate plea in his eyes. He began to speak, his voice clear and strong, carrying across the silent square. He was not speaking only to her. He was speaking to everyone. "People of Oakhaven," he began. "For weeks, I have walked among you under a false name. I have lied not just to one of you but to all of you. I called myself Ashworth, and I pretended to be a man I was not. A murmur went through the crowd. He held up a hand, silencing it. I did this because I was a coward, he continued, his gaze never leaving Alara's face. I was a man drowning in grief and cynicism, and I devised a cruel and foolish test to find someone of honest character. I had the arrogance to believe I could judge the hearts of others, while my own was closed and dishonest. He took a step forward, his boots heavy on the cobblestones. And then I met her. He gestured toward Alara's stall, not with the possessiveness of a count, but with the reverence of a penitent. I met a woman whose honesty is as pure and clear as the sugar she spins. I came to her shop to lie, and she met me with kindness. I came to test her, and she taught me what it means to have integrity. I hid my face and my name, and she saw the man I was trying to be, the man I had forgotten I could be. His voice grew thick with emotion. I fell in love with Alara, not the candymaker. Alara, her strength, her passion, her goodness. And in my fear, I broke her trust. I hurt her in a way that I can never fully repair. He was standing before her stall now. He looked directly into her eyes, and she saw not a trace of the cold count or the formal steward, but only the tormented, passionate man from the riverbank. I cannot take back the lie, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, meant only for her now. But I can spend the rest of my life trying to earn your forgiveness. I am not here to offer you a title. I am not here to make you a countess. I am here to ask Alara, the candymaker, if she will teach me how to live an honest life. I am here to ask for a chance to be the man you thought I was. He sank to one knee, in the dirt of the market square, before her and God and the entire village. I am not asking for your hand in marriage. Not yet. I am asking for a beginning, an honest 1 inch. The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye was on Alara. Her face was a mask of conflicting emotions, the deep, lingering pain of betrayal warring with the undeniable sincerity of his public humiliation. He wasn't offering her a castle. He was offering her his broken, humbled heart. He had stripped himself of his title, his power, his pride, laying it all at her feet. It was the grandest gesture she could possibly imagine, precisely because it was not about grandeur at all. It was about truth. Slowly, she took a step out from behind the safety of her stall. The crowd seemed to hold its collective breath. She walked toward the kneeling count, her expression unreadable. She stopped directly in front of him. He did not look up, but remained bowed, awaiting her judgment. She looked down at the top of his head, at the man who had brought her so much pain and so much joy. She had built a wall of pride around her heart, but his raw, public vulnerability was a battering ram against it. He had not come to command her, but to surrender. He had not offered her a life as his appendage, but had centered her, her work, her name in his plea. "Get up," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Alistair looked up, his face etched with uncertainty. He slowly rose to his feet, standing before her like a prisoner before a judge. "A beginning," she repeated his word, testing its weight. She looked around at the faces of her neighbors, then back at him. Her chin lifted. "I will grant you a beginning, my lord." A flicker of hope ignited in his eyes, but she held up a hand, her expression still serious. "On one condition." "Anything," he breathed. "No more secrets," she said, her voice ringing with the clarity of a bell. "Ever. My life will not be a footnote to yours. We meet as equals or we do not meet at all. I am Alara, the candymaker. You must see me as such always." A slow, wondrous smile spread across Alistair's face, the first genuine, unguarded smile she had ever seen from him. It transformed him, erasing the last shadows of the beast of Blackwood. "As equals," he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. Always he reached out, not to grab her, but offering his hand, palm up, the faint white line of the scar she had tended still visible. After a long moment, she placed her hand in his. A cheer erupted from the crowd. Thomas the blacksmith, watching from the edge of the square, managed a small, sad smile before turning back to his forge. He had lost, but he had lost to the truth. 1 year later, the great hearth in the main hall of Blackwood Manor roared with a fire so bright it made the suits of armor gleam like polished silver. The cavernous room, once cold and silent, was filled with the scent of melting sugar and the sound of children's laughter. In a newly built wing, with vast windows overlooking the gardens, stood the Alara Everett School of Confectionery Arts, where she taught her craft to a dozen eager students from the village and beyond. Alastair was no longer the reclusive count. He was simply Alastair. He had thrown open the doors of the manor, hosting market fairs on its lawns and turning dusty, forgotten rooms into workshops and libraries for the community. He had found his purpose not in his title, but in his partnership with the woman who had saved him. That evening, they stood before the fire, his arm around her shoulders. She leaned her head against his chest, watching the flames dance. Her simple candymaker's apron was hung on a hook by the hearth, a place of honor. He was the count and she was, by marriage, his countess, but in the quiet moments they were just Alastair and Alara. He looked down at her, his heart full. "Are you happy?" he whispered. She looked up, her brown eyes shining with a deep, contented love. She reached up and traced the scar on his face, no longer a mark of pain, but a part of the man she loved. "I have everything I need," she replied. His hand covered hers, his fingers lacing through hers. Their hands, once symbols of two different worlds, one calloused by labor, the other soft with privilege, were now simply joined, a testament to a love that had been tested by lies but had triumphed, quietly and completely,